Yeah, my name is Andy Hall. I came from Adobe Japan. It's actually been a couple of years since I gave a presentation in English, but I'm sure it's like falling off a bike. So yeah, and my talk today is on server-side Node.JS programming with Photoshop. So yeah, that's my self-introduction. I'm going to skip past it. This is a JavaScript conference, and obviously we all want to talk about JavaScript. So I know you're all sitting there thinking, why isn't anybody talking about Photoshop yet? Well, finally, the wait is over. I'm going to spend the next 45 minutes talking about Photoshop. But not really, because actually I barely know how to use it because I'm a programmer. And I'm not a designer like Ricardo said. But it turns out, for various historical reasons, Photoshop is a tool that's been around like 25 years. If you're not familiar with it, it has to do with manipulating images. But for various historical reasons, it's got like 3 or 4, possibly 5 different JavaScript interpreters built into it for various sorts of extensibility things and stuff like that. And there's the newest one that's just come out about 2 months ago, I think. It's based on Node.js, and that's what I'm going to talk about. There's several things, interpreters built in for various reasons. One of them that I'm going to focus on today is there's a VM called ExtendScript. And I think this is back in the day when JavaScript was only sort of half a thing. ExtendScript has been in Photoshop forever and ever. It's the way you hook into all the Photoshop APIs. If you want to like blur an image, there's a layer.blur sort of API. It's the way that you create Photoshop extensions. And I'm not going to go into any detail on it at all, but it lives somewhere in Photoshop, and there's this thing that you can access. And there's this layer on top of it called Kevlar, KVLR, which is a kind of a socket-based interface. And I'm not going to get into that stuff. I'm going to gloss it over, but there's several different moving parts in there. But what has just recently shipped about 2 months ago is that there's now an instance of Node.js built into the Photoshop executable. So anybody who's running the current version, there's a Node.js somewhere in the background. And the reason for that is it's purely as an extensibility mechanism. The idea is that it's called generator is the name of the feature. And the idea is that underneath that instance of Node, there's an app called Generator Core, which is built into Photoshop and runs automatically. And that app will load in other Node.js apps and run them as plugins. And that's what I want to talk about today. So the architecture I'll get to in a minute. First of all, I want to show you what the smart people at Adobe did with this technology to show off its sort of reason for existing. And this is my first demo. When you start Photoshop, if it's the newest version, it will have this thing in the file menu called Generate Image Assets. And the way it works is I'll just start up my trusty Photoshop at this super maximum inhuman resolution, and I'll open a PSD. And this is a PSD that me, the non-designer, made. Let's just imagine for the sake of argument that it's a website. Because this is actually how websites mostly get made. Like 95% of websites these days still. The designer lays it out in Photoshop because there aren't that many good design tools for HTML5, which is something that we're working on. But let's say for the sake of argument, you've got a designer, he's made this website in Photoshop. And usually everything is separated out on layers. And you've got all this, like, the background's a layer and everything like that. And then what usually happens is he throws this at a developer, and the developer has to go through and break out all the layers into different pieces and apply styles, and then figure out the architecture of the site based on the design, et cetera, et cetera. And we don't have a complete fix for that. But one thing that makes it a little easier is this generator plugin that comes, like I said, built in. And, it's already turned on. So image assets is turned on. And then what you do is, let me zoom out so I can maybe see the desktop as well. I'll put it like that. So I've got a file browser open on my desktop. And inside this Photoshop file, I will take a foreground. And this layer name is just a thing that designers use to keep track of the assets. I'll make it layer name.ping, so foreground.ping. And then over here in my file browser, next to the PSD, a folder has been made called assets, and it's sort of automatically generated this file called foreground.ping, which looks like that. And then if I go back into Photoshop, and let's say I want to get all designery, and I'm going to there, I'm a designer, look. Hey. Hey. So, and the image in the background was updated live based on the way the design looks. And the idea is that it facilitates this whole process of breaking your comp into little pieces and putting all those pieces on the website. And that's great. I mean, it's a really good, I guess, thing for designers. It's not something that I use in my work. But going back to here. The plus to this is that it's really useful. It solves people's problems. In fact, my colleague demoed this at an ad agency, and one of the people there like literally cried, I'm told. So it's really useful. But I have a big problem with it because I'm a developer evangelist, and the problem is this thing is, it's just a useful thing that makes people's lives better. I don't want that. I want something that looks like a crazy weird demo and serves no purpose. So I made something that looks like a crazy weird demo and serves no purpose, and that's what I want to show you today. Because the point is that this thing that I just showed, I mean, it publishes images, but it's not a feature to publish those images. The feature is that it's got this whole extensibility layer, and you can sort of hook into it and do anything you want. So that's what I did. So I will close that, and I'll make a new file, and make a reasonably sized file. And now in the background, I will do something which I will explain in a moment. In this super, super small resolution, I will okay, I'll run this weird Node.js command, and now something is running in the background, and something has happened. And what has happened so far is only one thing. This file, this is really hard to deal with this resolution. The file now has a new menu option called Awesome Mode, because it's awesome. That's why it's called Awesome Mode. So I turn that on, and now some stuff is happening in this node window. And now, pay attention, because this is what we're about to see is, I think, basically the future of Photoshop, right? I'm going to zoom in over here on the layer screen. And hopefully this will work, because I haven't tried it in this room. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. OK, Photoshop. New layer. See, you do a demo and it doesn't work. What happened? All right. Ah, it's going nuts. OK, Photoshop. OK, Photoshop. What is this doing? OK, Photoshop. This is crazy. Hold on. OK, Photoshop. Ah, I've never had it not work this well. Hold on. OK, Photoshop. Why is this not working? OK, Photoshop. This is really strange. OK, Photoshop. I do not know why this would happen. One moment. OK, Photoshop. OK, Photoshop. Ah, this is a nightmare. OK, Photoshop. OK, Photoshop. Thank you. New layer. Ah, what is it doing? Yay! All right. OK, Photoshop. Why would that not work? Ah, this is really crazy. All right. We're going to change plans slightly, and I'm going to jump into the code so I can make it not, so I can make it stop looking at those other commands. So let's pretend that demo worked, because it's clearly doing something here. What it's doing is it's doing voice recognition, and then in theory that would have it would have understood me saying OK Photoshop, and then it would have done like new layer would make a new layer, and random color would make a random color, and things like that. So, wow, that was quite a demo, right? So, hey, thank you very much. Right. Clearly, the guts are working. There's some tuning to be done, possibly with acoustics. But to move on to the architecture. So like I said, what's happening is inside Photoshop, there's this node application called Generated Core that loads in and runs other applications, which are the plugins. The thing that I did in the terminal is that you can also run, over here on the right side, you can run your own instance of Node, and then run in that instance a separate copy of the Generated Core application, and then you can load in separate plugins. And the reason you can do that is because, like I said at the beginning, there was this pre-existing sort of socket-based communication layer called Kevlar at the top. And both versions of Generated Core hook through that, and that's why you can have sort of multiple versions of it. But it's basically dev mode and installed mode. So if you're going to roll out Like I think my plugin, as you can see, is basically finished. So if I was going to roll that out to the world, they could put it inside their Photoshop plugins directory, and they wouldn't have to run their own Node command. But when you run it separately, you can use a different version of Node or anything you like. So, and that's why that command happened. So moving on to the code, I will open a code editor. This, by the way, this is the code editor I like best at the moment is something called Brackets, which is, can you hear me? This is made internally at Adobe, but it's an open source project, and it's an editor that's sort of specialized for JavaScript and HTML and CSS, and it's actually made in JavaScript and CSS as well. So it's, I think, the only editor where if you want to jump in and change the code, it's all HTML, possibly. And I'll make it like super large for this resolution. Yeah. So, and in here I'm looking at the source of my awesome, as you can see, obviously awesome plugin. Inside here, this is just a regular Node application. There's a package.json. And there's stuff in there. The only really important thing is to declare a main function. And you've got one called main.js. And then inside main.js, you've got a fairly normal sort of looking Node application. If you've ever used Node, this is what it does. And then down at the bottom somewhere, all you really have to do is export an init function, and then everything else is sort of handled by this core app that reads it in and runs it for you. Apart from that, it's a completely normal vanilla Node.js application. There's nothing magical going on at all. What happens inside the stuff is, well, for example, I've got a package called Julius, which I'll get to in a second. That does the voice recognition. I've got some other stuff. And then in here, somewhere in here, there is various functions that do all the things. And if somewhere in here we see, yeah, here's the switch statement that's doing all the commands. And yeah, that's the really annoying part that's causing all the trouble. But getting back to that in a second. OK. Now, pausing a moment, I want to say a few words about Julius, which is the library that I'm using for the voice recognition, because it turns out to be kind of interesting. Usually, if you were going to try to put voice recognition into an app with Node.js, I think the natural thing to do would to use an existing library, and that's what I tried to do. I couldn't find one that worked very well, because most of them are based around the idea of piping stuff out to an external service, like Google's speech-to-text service. The problem with that is that you tend to sort of get back anything. So if you say duplicate layer, you might get back the text duplicate layer, but you might get back lubricate player or whatever, because it's super generalized. Julius is a package that comes out of Japan originally, but all the stuff is localized into English as well. And it's a sort of super generalized text recognition engine, but you define your own grammars and vocabularies, and it looks like this. So inside the source, you define a piece of grammar that looks like this, where let's say like a sentence can start with silence and then do thank you, and then silence ends, or it can be a PS command, which is like layer command layer, for example. And then in a separate file, you define a vocabulary where you say like a layer command is any of these 3 words, and these 3 words have these pronunciations. And the point of all this is, and then it handles all the magic of taking in an audio stream and looking for these sounds. But the point of it is that it only knows how to understand the commands that you specifically define. So if you snap your fingers, it will guess that it is one of those commands that you've chosen. And that's why, in theory, I have this very cleverly defined command chain where you have to start by saying, OK, Photoshop, and then you do something else. Because if you didn't have some kind of trigger like that to start voice recognition, then every noise would be translated into like new layer or undo or delete a layer or something like that. So yeah, so Julius is it turned out to be quite easy to work with, and I really recommend if you're doing something that involves this kind of thing in Node.js. It was really fun to get working. Now, obviously, this is great and going to change the face of Photoshop, but probably some of you have a nagging question, which is that wouldn't it be kind of stupid if everybody was like actually in a design company with like 20 people sitting in the same room using Photoshop and they were all talking to their machines? Wouldn't that be kind of stupid? And the answer was, well, obviously that would be stupid because the machine wouldn't be answering them back, right? So the second feature of the demo, and I don't know if I can turn it on because of this weird OK Photoshop stuff. The second feature is to have the Photoshop answer back through the Say API. And it probably won't work, but let's give it a shot. I'll rerun Node, and it's listening over here again. I will turn awesome mode on again, and do I have audio? Okay. And we'll just keep this open and see if it's working. OK, Photoshop. OK, Photoshop. Voice mode.
Voice mode activated.
All right. Yeah. That's a big round of applause for a very simple demo. Thank you very much. I appreciate that very, very highly. So that's obviously like about 5 lines of code in the Node.js side, because all I'm doing is starting a process and I'm handing it over text to the speech, or the say API, which exists on Macintoshes. And it looks like, I'll show you real quick. There's, yeah. A function looks like this. There's it's using the spawn child method of Node.js. It's really simple. You hand over a line of text and it just works. And the great thing is, if you run it on a PC, I don't know, probably nothing happens. I haven't tried it, because it's a demo. Yay. So, all right. Moving on to another architectural thing. One of the things that's interesting about working with this kind of architecture is that there are several different JavaScript interpreters involved. In this particular case, we have a Node.js application which is running inside, VP8 is inside there somewhere, implementing or running all the lines of JavaScript. Somewhere inside Photoshop, there's a completely different VM running a different. It's not VP8. It's something much, much older. That's also running JavaScript. And when you want to make a new layer, you've got to run JavaScript. You're in your Node VM running some script, and you want to go in to the Photoshop VM, wherever the hell that is, and run some code that creates a new layer. And it turns out that it's really, really hard to get VMs to work together like that and share the same namespace and so on. But what's really, really easy is to pass text back and forth. So that's what actually happens in this architecture, is that, let's say, when I want to delete a layer, first I call the say function, which has a woman's voice saying deleting your layer, which is hilarious, obviously. And then I call this function send.js, and I pass it an actual string of text, which gets sent over a socket into Photoshop, and somewhere inside that world, this string of text is interpreted as JavaScript. And that would seem like a really tedious way to work, and it turns out, if you actually try it, it is a really tedious way to work. So the way that I work around it, and this is the one and only JavaScript tip and technique in my speech, so enjoy it. The way I work around that is that I didn't know this. If you pass a function to if you call toString on a function, it actually gives back the text definition of that function. So if I pass over a parenthesis and then a function, toString, and then I close the parenthesis, I pass in the arguments, and then at the end, I pass an open and close parenthesis. Then that text of that function gets defined on the other side as an IFI and instantly executed with the arguments that you pass over. And it's kind of interesting. And the reason I go into that is because I think this kind of thing we're going to see more of it as the years go on. In fact, this isn't the only time I've used that technique with Photoshop, in fact, because since a couple of years ago, we've started, in Adobe at least, we've started having all our, come back. We started doing quite a lot of our extensibility stuff in HTML5. And for example, in Photoshop, you have...
Yes. Enhancing.
Yeah.
Enhancing. 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 Enhancing.
Should I turn this off?
Enhancing.
Okay. So apparently, while I was talking, somehow I miraculously said, OK, Photoshop. All right. Oh, you know what? In fact, one thing I forgot to mention. Why is it you're probably wondering what the hell enhance means. That was a feature that I put in because I'm pretty sure this is going to make $1 million. I'm going to send this to Hollywood, in fact. The idea is if I have a photo like this, right? And now what I'll do, first the cameras aren't running it, right? The cameras aren't running, and I open this photo, and I'm not in Photoshop. And I'll pass it a filter. I'll do a box blur, and then, yeah. So I'll box blur 3 times. Now, I run the plugin, and this is going to for this demo to work, this is going to have to, another miracle will have to occur for me to say OK Photoshop correctly. But I'll turn awesome mode back on. Right. Now, you run your cameras, right? You're in Hollywood. And the enhance feature is just hooked into the undo function. And earlier I blurred it 3 times. So now I say, OK Photoshop. Come on. OK Photoshop. Ah. Die Photoshop. Oh. I really thought that was going to work. OK Photoshop. Ah, why? Come on, one last time. Work. OK Photoshop. OK Photoshop. OK Photoshop. OK Photoshop. OK Photoshop. OK Photoshop. Oh, God. This has never failed. Well, sorry. This actually has never failed in the office. It must be the, I don't know, the mics. Anyway, you say OK Photoshop, then you say enhance, 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 enhance. Wow. Okay, that is the applause of pity, but I will take it. All right. So, back to here. Where were we? Oh, yeah. Oh, and so the reason I think we'll see more of this is that so Photoshop, for example, you can define your own panels in Photoshop, and then you can package them up as extensions, and you can sell them to people and stuff like that. And they can, inside that panel, you can define your own workflows or whatever you want to do. But if you define your own panel, the code that you would define the panel in is HTML5. I'm echoing weirdly. Sorry about that. And so that feature has actually been in Photoshop for about 2 years, I think. And the way it works is there's a little implementation of Chromium, like the Chromium embedded framework. And so each panel that you define in HTML5, it has a little instance of Chrome. Thank you very much, Google, for making Chromium embedded framework free. And then, so that kind of extensibility is already made in HTML5. And in that case, if you want to run delete a layer or something, it's the same thing. You have to pass a string of JavaScript over to the other VM. And I think it's so easy and it makes so much sense to embed like mini web views inside applications that I think we'll see more and more applications taking that route. And then that'll mean in more and more cases, you'll need to be passing strings of JavaScript between different VMs because it makes so much sense to put in different VMs for different reasons, and it's so very difficult to get them to share the same context. But anyway, moving back to the speech. So there's a quick digression now, which is my dream is, I have a lot of books at home. My dream is that someday there could be some kind of like Node.JS that plugs into my living room, and then I could call a function that would sort the books in like a certain order. So they could be sorted by like color or by subject or something like that. And this, I think, goes sort of to Tim's talk this morning about the Internet of Things. I mean, if you could do that, just think what you do. You'd spend all day hacking your living room. I mean, it'd be so, bloody useful that you wouldn't want to do anything else. But the reason I go into this is that when you have a tool like Photoshop, and this is true of like a lot of 3D tools, a lot of video tools, a lot of like layout tools for like digital publishing, that kind of stuff. Any time a tool, like a design tool or a production tool, gets to a suitable level of complexity, then across the world there's going to be tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people who sort of their job is to use that tool for 8 hours a day, and that's all they do. And that's certainly true of Photoshop in the world's like ad agencies. They'll have dozens of people who do that kind of work. But when you take something like Node.js, it's that powerful and has that many existing libraries, and you plug it in to a tool that's that sort of deep and heavily used, it sort of achieves the same thing as if you could plug Node.js into your living room, because the Photoshop UI, that's to those tens of thousands of people, that's their living room, that's where they spend all their time. And so now if they have a way to, like, I'm going to write some JavaScript, my PSD has 10,000 layers, and it's really, hard to manage them, so I'm going to write a script that's going to filter them or whatever is necessary, maybe not for everybody, but for me, my personal workflow, it's sort of, for that person, it's as handy as being able to sort your bookshelves. And that's why I think this sort of thing is going to happen a lot more. In Adobe, it's strictly a sort of early stage experiment. I mean, it's a fully supported feature, but whether we're going to keep doing this in every other app we make is something that I don't know yet. But certainly, it's the idea of putting a Node instance into Photoshop and being able to extend it. I think it's something that we see it as a big success, and it's something that we really want to roll out in other applications. And also the thing that I mentioned before about defining panels in HTML5, that's, I think, about 7 of our applications now, like Flash, Illustrator, InDesign, a couple more. They all share the same sort of mechanism for defining a panel in HTML5. So this sort of nothing to do with web browsers at all, but defining stuff in HTML5 and JavaScript and using that to extend tools that are pre-existing, I think is certainly something that we're going to continue, and I hope it bleeds over into other like 3D apps and things like that. And what was I going to say next? Sorry. Yeah, so leaving that there, I have one more gratuitous demo, and this is another thing that also makes no sense. And also, here's the fun part, may not work because it really is sensitive to the way the room is designed and the way the lighting works. And I'm keeping it secret, even though it's sitting on the screen right now, because it says Leap. So has anybody tried Leap Motion? These things right here? Yeah? All right. Well, you'll see what it is in a second. I thought, wouldn't it be awesome and completely useless to hook Leap Motion into Photoshop? And the great part is, I don't have to speak to turn it on. It's just going to... So in theory, it could, in theory, work. Might not. So I've run my node again. Now I have my application open. I will make a new layer. Now I've plugged in my Leap Motion. Now in principle, you know what? I need to turn on awesome mode. There we go. There we go. Yeah. All right, okay. So, and apparently I have some debug code in there as well. So, yeah, what's that doing? Leap Motion, for those of you who haven't worked with it yet, it's a little device that that tracks some space above above the little device like that for things like gestures and things like that. It was really, really easy to work with, and I really recommend if you want to play with it and getting one. It's about $100, I think, in the US, in US dollars. And the code to access it winds up being very simple and very well documented, and every problem that I had with it turned out to be due to the fact that it has just had a big update, and the documentation hasn't reflected anything that changed. So the big key to, where is this? It turned out that the big secret to working well with Leap.js was to use the Node Leap.js controller library and to downgrade it to before the recent update. And I'm sure there's lots of great stuff in the new update, but it isn't documented, so I couldn't get it to work. But then what you wind up doing inside Leap.js, it communicates over a socket, but the socket handler is very well done, and it handles all its own code. So all you really need to do is make a listener, and where's the stuff? And then every couple of, however often you specify, you get a frame, and then it hands you information about things like whether that frame has some fingers, and how many fingers it has, and then if they're valid or not, and then you sort of parse through this code. And so all I'm doing here is I'm tracking the fingers, and then normally I draw a couple of guidelines to show you where your fingers are, and then and then when you get back a 3D pointer, the third number in the 3D pointer data is a z, and the z is, in this case, this axis. So all I'm doing is the z equals 1 is the axis of the device, so every time z goes past 1, I call it touching, and then I start drawing a line. And it's quite simple. And this code is up on GitHub, and I'll show you in a second. And so it wound up, this is, I don't know, if you took out the comments, this is like 20 lines just to get that working. So now, having said that, is it a good way to draw lines? No, it's a really, really terrible way to draw lines because it's not that fast, and the tracking is not very accurate. And if you actually do it, well, first of all, if you have like a reflective ceiling, then nothing will happen because it completely fails. And then if you actually try to draw it, it'll randomly sort of decide whether your thumb is a finger or not, and the data will keep fluctuating, and it's really, really hard to use. But my point in sort of implementing this is that if you can do that, you can sort of do anything. So smarter minds than mine can, in theory, take this technology and make things that actually do make sense. Like, for example, if you're an ad agency and you have a couple of hundred people who use Photoshop every day, you probably also have some kind of CMS where you store your assets. You probably have some kind of workflow that requires people to submit designs to their boss, and their boss to submit those designs to a client. And if you have Node.js built into the tools, you could, in principle, you could not only, say, hook in Photoshop directly into the CMS or that authorization process or whatever you want to do. You could, scrap that idea. You could run the CMS from inside Photoshop if you wanted to, because it's Node. You can do anything. You could make a sort of Git-style, decentralized sort of process where everybody has their own repository that lives inside Photoshop. And you could, the possibilities are kind of endless because it's Node, and you can, anything that, there's all these thousands of great libraries for Node, and you can now call them all from Photoshop, and you can call Photoshop from them. So I think it's an example of taking two really deep, complex things and hooking them together, and hopefully you sort of multiply the possibilities of what comes out. That's essentially all my talk. I spoke really fast and I have some time left. The source is online. Oh, I should have mentioned, everything except Photoshop that I showed is open source and on GitHub. So the generator core, the app that loads in and runs the plugins, is open source. The built-in plugin for publishing out the image assets, that's also on GitHub, and it's all there. It's for people to extend and do something with. My source is also up. I wouldn't necessarily recommend that you go off it, but there are some better getting started sort of plugins if you want to give it a try. And I will, there was a bunch of links in here, and so I put the slides up a moment ago, and I will just tweet that. So if anybody wants the slides, I just tweeted them, and they're up there somewhere. And that's my Twitter, and that's my talk. So, and we have actually a bunch of time for questions if anybody has any. Thank you very much.